Welcome back. There's an all-new two-night show event called BTK, Confessions of a Serial Killer. This is on A&E, premiering this weekend, and here to tell us all about it is Dr. Katherine Ramsland. She's a forensic psychologist, a professor. She's in the show, actually in most of the show, a very key player in this entire true crime story. Dr. Ramsland, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So as a forensic psychologist on the show, tell me more about your role in this and about the show in general.
Well, the show comes from a book that I worked with Dennis Rader for 5 years, and also about a community, Wichita, that was affected by his predatory activity.
And in the show, you go really deep into the mind of Dennis Rader. This is a serial killer. And I'm curious about why that is a necessary piece of this story. He's been convicted. Many people have seen his confession. It was recorded. It's a well-known story for many people, especially in that part of the country. So why is it so necessary to go into his mind, to get more information about what he did and why?
Well, most people are familiar with the investigation part of the story because that's primarily been what has been featured in books and documentaries. We haven't really explored how he became a serial killer. He's an all-American boy without any real trauma in his background, no abuse, nothing that you might expect from some of the stereotypes we have about serial killers. So he's an outlier. He teaches us things in terms of how we need to broaden what we understand about a serial killer so that we can begin to identify red flags in the behavior of children that we can then intervene and treat so as to prevent future predators.
So really the main motivation is to kind of get into his mind, try and find patterns that you may be able to recognize in other individuals to prevent something like this in the future.
Yes, exactly that. We're trying to not just give him a platform so he can talk about his dark journey, but also to use it to teach people in criminology, my field, forensic psychology, and law enforcement, some of the things that we're leaving out so that we're not making those kinds of mistakes.
I was able to watch a sneak preview of the show, really intriguing, very well done. I love everything that you bring up and your interactions with him. I was struck by a part in the show where you mentioned the media and how the media had a hard time knowing exactly how to portray him, especially during the investigation and during the trial, as he was, as you mentioned, kind of this next door guy who had a job and a family.
Well, he's not really that unusual among serial killers for having a family, being an ordinary citizen. We do have others like him. But yeah, it's difficult to understand how a person can have these contradictions in him, these moral polarities, where he's a family man, a churchgoer, a church leader, Boy Scout leader, an ordinary citizen, and yet stalking, killing, breaking into people's homes, looking in their windows, and trying to terrorize his community. So people have a hard time understanding how a seemingly ordinary person can be like this.
And how long have you been working with him, with Dennis Rader? When did you get introduced to this case, and what made you decide to be a big part of the show?
Well, I started working with him in 2010, so that was 11 years ago, and we spent 5 years on the book itself. And then the show itself arose from someone who had a vision for taking the book as well as a much broader sense of the community he affected, and really looking at as a documentary on really middle America, the heartland, and how could it produce a serial killer like this. So I was obviously a main part of this because I had done all the work with him, and we urged him to be part of this as well. So we have interviews with him, but there are interviews with, for example, the first reporter who came to the first murder scene, who had never been back to it in all these years. We have interviews with law enforcement. We have interviews with the DA, with people who were citizens, just ordinary people at the time, and they talk about how they remember how frightening it was. So it's really a portrait of a basic American community, a small city, and what happened to them when a person decided he wanted to have power over them by wreaking this kind of havoc and destroying lives, destroying people, destroying families.
It seems that there's been a bit of a resurgence or a renewed interest in true crime, whether it's series like this, podcasts, books. Have you noticed that as well, that over the past couple of years, people are getting more and more interested in cases like this?
Yeah, over the past 5 years has really been a resurgence, and especially during the pandemic. I think people are really fascinated with the mystery of the human being who can develop into this kind of person. They're very fascinated with the cases and how the cases got put together. So it really, there's a lot of different ways into it. But when you take a person like Rader, who has multifaceted kinds of presentations, that holds people's interest. And so there has been a lot of interest in all kinds of things, cold cases, any kind of investigation, people who snap, but serial killers have really become a primary fascination for the American public.
And this is a very tragic story, everything that happened, the crimes that were committed. We mentioned earlier that a main motivation of getting into his mind is to help prevent future crimes. But what else do you hope audiences will take away after viewing this?
Well, the one thing I hope they take away is to not think that because we have all these documentaries and serial killers that they have it all figured out. We have a lot of stereotypes. We have a lot of myths floating around about serial killers. And I hope the audiences will understand that some of the predictions they make and some of the notions they have are not necessarily true. And when they hold on to stereotypes, it actually makes them more vulnerable, not safer, even though it feels safer. So I'm hoping that people will see a show like this and learn to be careful.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Katherine Ramsland, for being here today, telling us all about this 2-night event called BTK, Confessions of a Serial Killer. You can watch it on AEW this weekend, Sunday and Saturday, January 8th, Sunday, January 9th. Be sure to tune in and learn more about this really intriguing, tragic story and get behind the scenes and a look into the mind of a serial killer. We'll be back here on Mountain Connections right after this.